Hey everybody, this is Heather with Young and Savvy Genealogist, and today I want to start my new video series with some of the storytelling videos that I intend to start making. And for these, I want to pick either an ancestor or a family and kind of talk about their story, a little bit of how I found them, put some flesh on some of the bones of the people that I look for every day, that I spend my time looking for. Stories are the most interesting content that we have to share. And so in addition to the educational videos that I'm making, I want to take more time to tell some stories. Today, I want to talk about my great-grandmother, Muriel Michaels. So before I get into it, because this story is very long and kind of complicated, I want to give you some of the background that you can look at on your own if you're interested. The larger historical context of this family, the way I put the records together. I've already written that out in a blog post, so be sure to look in the description for that if you're interested in seeing it. And I also did a summary of what I found in a video for different family members, and I'll leave that in the cards and also in the description. I'm going to try and keep this video from getting too long, but it's kind of the story version continuation of the race and DNA video that I did. In the comments, I talked about how I wanted to talk more about my biracial family and my experience with that. And I've thought about the best way to tell that story. And I'm going to do that by talking about Muriel and my grandmother and their story and how it plays out together. Because it directly influences what my experience was like in trying to uncover this story. The story of Muriel is basically one where I'm looking for a ghost in a very well-documented family. You can tell if you watched the video of this particular family story, they're very well-documented, they're very active in a predominantly black community in Halifax. There's this period right before World War II where the family moves and transitions out of Halifax, Nova Scotia into Montreal in Quebec. And when that happens, the family dynamic really shifts, and I think a part of that has to do with the death of Charles Pinheiro. He dies. The surviving family members go through a lot together, some of which they recover from and some of which they don't. One of the earlier struggles that has since happened is that their mother has died. Their father is a World War I vet, and he has what sounds like ongoing post-traumatic stress disorder and kind of isolates himself from the rest of the family. So the people that are left are Muriel and her other 3 surviving siblings. The family starts to kind of fragment a little bit, and Muriel is no exception to this. Her adult life is one pretty much of isolation. And I can't tell with the evidence that I have whether that was intentional or whether she was kind of ostracized from the rest of the family. Muriel has a biracial child. I can tell from DNA testing that my grandmother was a biracial child. And I'm, hot on the heels of her white father, who I have every reason to believe never knew she existed. There's no evidence that he was ever in her life, or that she ever knew what his name was. When my grandmother immigrated to the United States in 1963, I didn't discover until I saw her immigration paperwork and her papers after she died a couple of years ago, what she actually considered her race to be. On her immigration papers, she calls herself mulatto. I don't know if that was a legal term or not, but it's the term that she used to describe herself. That was the first time I'd ever seen anything from my grandmother where she actually talks about what her racial background is. And this ties into Muriel's story. From what I can tell, she's living on her own. She's a domestic. She is living with families that she works with. But even this entire time period, the only records that I have of where Muriel is and what she's doing are the birth records in relation to my grandmother. She's living in a completely different city. She's in Toronto, separate from the rest of her family. My grandmother was baptized, so I have at least some evidence that she was either attending church or at least had my grandmother baptized or was attending church long enough to have that done. Still Anglican, like the rest of her family. From that moment, from the moment my grandmother was born, everything kind of happens really fast, and then there's no evidence anywhere of Muriel for at least 20 years. My grandmother was raised in a foster family. She was raised in a black foster family, but still continued to maintain contact with my great-grandmother. So there's this really strange dynamic where Emily is still able to see Muriel. I don't know how often it was. It sounds like it might have only been like a holiday, like multiple times a year sort of thing. So she knew who her mother was. She was able to talk about her and had memories with her and everything, but primarily she was raised by a foster mother. It was always really hard to tell with my grandmother when she would talk about her mother who she was talking about, because her foster mother and her birth mother had really similar backgrounds. And so she'd talk about a memory with her mom and you'd have no sense of who she was talking about. And to her, she treated it in her mind pretty interchangeably. But looking at Muriel as a genealogist, I don't have a better way to describe it. Muriel is a ghost. In this really well-documented family, where everybody sticks together, everybody goes to the same family functions, everybody has memories of everybody, Muriel is never there. And whether that's of her own choice or what the situation is, I don't have a sense of that. But from what I can tell and what records I think I've even been able to find her on, it's hard for me to even get the confirmation that the city directories I'm looking at are 100% her. That's how little contact she has with anybody. She continues to work as a domestic servant where she's living in the places where she's working, keeps to herself, and the reason that I think it's her is just because there's no one else of that name in the city where she's living. Not a whole lot of surviving records, not a lot of surviving pictures. Basically dies living with an older roommate, and kind of from what I was told by my grandmother, the roommate basically took everything of value before my grandmother could get there. And so most of Muriel's history, her story, is completely gone. It's been erased. And what little of it my grandmother knew, she kept to herself. And what that translates into in terms of a lived experience for me is that I was not allowed to know any of this about my grandmother. Part of that was just her being protective of her own lived experience. She maintained a really strong separation between her white family in the United States and her black and biracial family members in Canada. That was something she maintained throughout her life, especially after her mother died in the 80s. And so it was firmly in place by the time I was even born. But I also think that part of the reason I wasn't allowed to know this story is that there was so much of it that my grandmother just didn't know. So I could ask her questions, and she would say, my grandmother never lied to me. If she knew something, if I asked the right question, she would either not answer the question or she would tell me the truth, but she would never lie to me. So everything she ever told me was either the truth or something that she believed to be the truth because of other things that she was told. We were very aware of these other family members in Canada, and like I remember being little and wanting to talk to them on the phone, and she would let me talk to some people, but she wouldn't let me talk to other people. I remember her mentioning different people throughout my life, and even as a genealogist, knowing that she maintained contact with some of these other family members, I asked for phone numbers. I would ask for, where they lived so I could try and get in contact with them, and she would just tell me no, that she didn't want me to talk to them. It was really hard. It was really strange. It was one of the experiences that has made me want to be a genealogist, because when you have relationships with other people that you feel like you're not allowed to know about, it changes the way you see yourself. It changes the way you see yourself in context of everything. You feel like you don't know yourself. You feel like there are, forbidden topics that you're not allowed to ask about, and it just really grows this desiring you to want to know. It's just my personality. I feel like there's one of two ways that you can go with this, and my grandmother went one way and I went the other way. My grandmother had this ongoing sense of shame. She had so much shame and so much fear, and that was a lot of the reason why she didn't want us to have contact with those family members. She didn't want anyone to ever feel the sense of shame that she felt, not having the answers to the questions of her own life. And then there's me, who comes along, and I don't take any of the shame I don't carry any of it with me. I refuse to even acknowledge it as something that I should feel. I look at the situations in my family and I think, how can I learn about this? What should I take from it? And the answer to that is never shame. It's always a sense of triumph. How can I be a better person for it? How can I treat other people better for what I've learned? Right now, Muriel is still a ghost. There is more about her that's about to become less ghost-like, and I have DNA to thank for that. I am super excited for the discoveries that I'm going to make, regardless of what they are, and regardless of how they make other people feel. In researching stories like this, I have gained a sense that the best way to deal with family stories that involve shame is not to silence them. Shame grows in silence. It's how it happens. And I don't have a sense of shame about any of this. So the way that I approach my research is, if I'm talking to someone who doesn't want to talk about these things, I don't force them to. However, I don't allow myself to be silenced either. So if someone doesn't want to talk about something, that's fine, but they're not going to stop me from talking about it. That has been my philosophy through all of the different research that I've done. It's going to continue to be my philosophy and my approach as I continue to research Muriel and fill in the gaps that I can about her life story and change the narrative that my grandmother inherited and that she was given. I'm really interested to hear about your experiences with biracial family members in the comments if you want to share them, so be sure to leave them there. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I hope to see you again.